And motivation has been it's been an issue this year, and probably a lot of it ties back to coming out of a pandemic. But how do you, as both faculty and students, how do you find ways to motivate your students, or even know if that's the issue? And then students, how do you find ways to stay motivated? Or what are you looking for from your instructor, if anything in that area? It's a loaded question.
So motivation, I think, is always difficult for both students and professors as the semester goes on. And I think that a lot of the motivation that you have in person does fade out when it's online. When you're in person, you develop a lot more friendships and relationships within the class, just in that you may not be super close friends, but you know everyone who's like sitting near you, typically in your classroom. Whereas on Zoom, you don't have that personal connection with anyone else unless you've been in a group project with them or you know them from a previous class. There's only so much you can do, and this may be unpopular for students, but I think that having questions or assignments due during class, or polls,
it's a great idea.
or things due right. Some of my professors have things due 15 minutes after class starts. So if you forget to submit right before class, you can still submit, but it's due before class. And I think having those keeps us engaged. For some classes, especially if it's discussion-based, having it due after is much better. But several of my classes have it's more participation points than whether or not you get the answers right or wrong, but it has you engaged. Yeah. You think about the answer, and then in class, real time, you discuss it. And I think that helps with motivation, because you're not feeling like you're getting behind, because you have to stay there. You have to stay engaged. So I think that's helpful, even though students probably won't find it that popular.
Well, one of the things I found with having an assignment that I give right after class, I make it due 1 minute before the next class begins. And I start off by pulling up the results. You can do the quiz statistics, right? It's like, okay, how'd you do? And I've made it a policy in my classes that if the score on it is 66% or less, if a third of the students or more don't get it correct, then I automatically give them all credit for the problem, and we work it out in detail as to what was going on. And I find they like that, Yeah. I've also found every once in a while they'll band together and purposely not answer a question, or just because they want me to. It's really interesting. But I like conniving students, that are going to scheme it out.
I don't know about other majors, but all my students are on a GroupMe for my class. So I'm a class of 90, and they're all 90 are on the GroupMe. So once a hint gets out, it's out everywhere.
That's good. That's another positive of how technology has changed how we teach. So I like that.
I think having GroupMe is really good for coordination, because students can find groups of students who may not understand. And honestly, the best thing about GroupMe for me is finding study groups. Even if it's only like 3 or 4 people that you know from the class, if you can have their contact information and say, hey, I'm kind of struggling with this topic. Do you guys want to meet up and study for it on Zoom? Has been really useful. I've done that plenty of times. And I think, also just making sure that the class roster is published so that students can at least email each other is beneficial. Because I've had some where you can't. And on the online, you don't know who's in the class.
I have had one concern, though, with the GroupMe that I think I'm starting to encounter more often, which is, to state the obvious, on exams, students don't have the GroupMe, right? So if you ride the coattails too much from the GroupMe, I think that can also be a concern, a negative for some students, because they think they get it, but then on the exam, right, it's only their work, and they can't ask a classmate for a tip, so there's that risk, I think, as well.
Motivation is a very multifaceted thing, and some people are motivated by one sort of thing, and some people just completely immune to it. I think the video game designers really nailed it when they designed their video games, and therefore, coincidentally or not, I gave a guest lecture in one of your ceramic engineering classes. Jeff Smith invited me with Kelly Wilkerson. It was an intercultural dimensions of leadership, but one of the portion that I devoted is the kind of a gamer types and mentality of the students. I'm not going to bore you, there's like 6 different types, very elaborate, but what I think the three important ones, we need to understand who our students are and what drives them. What you described, Susan, is I would call like a socializer. People who have to perform best when they are connected with others. When they lose that connection, there's immediate danger for them to dropping out altogether. And that's what I suspect happened to one of the individuals you mentioned, right? So in the online environment, this is extremely difficult to achieve, to pull them in and make sure they connected with. But again, in personal life, it's really easier. Now, the other category is the students who classified as achievers. They're internally driven to go from one level to another level. And I love this type of students because you let it go and just observe them thrive. They don't need you for anything. And those are the ones that Wayne, I suppose, that do well when you record your lectures and you give them their assignments and they just, plow through, right? And then they report. But then there are free spirits. And you mentioned those. Those the guys and girls who like their freedom of time. I'm going to do it on my timetable as long as I know what the deadline is. I'm going to do it on Monday, Sunday, morning, night. So those three, you see, there you go. You need to know what drives each individual student. And we all have those tendencies, but we have it in different proportions, in different combinations. And a lot of these motivation aspects are very situational. What drives us in the personal aspect cannot necessarily translate into academic performance. So I'm not going to bore you with a lot, but again, these three, right, that I mentioned, if you know you have students like that, techniques of your engagement should be slightly different. Well, there is another type that I think we identified clearly for all of our incoming freshmen. It's the type called the player. This person is motivated by grades, points, assignments, the badges, check marks, whatever it is. But that's a phase. That's a phase. We start here and we want them to become achievers through the social phase, right? And then become the free spirits. Because when we leave them, when we dismiss them from the university, right? When we give them the diploma, they have to be on their own and fly. I'm amazed how far the gaming industry have, progressed in the last 10 years. They nailed it, and we should be thinking about these things too, how to motivate the students and draw them in.
So what does that look like if you have large lecture, you're dealing with a lot of students? Is there a way that you can easily get feedback from, is the student struggling because it's lack of motivation? Or are you guys able to tell those things?
Short answer, sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's obvious and other times it's very difficult.
Is there ways to restructure your class in the midst of that?
With like a 90 students, not so easily.
Yeah.
Not impossible, and I do adapt some small ways.
Yeah.
And if I can identify a student who's struggling, I certainly work with him or her to help mitigate what's going on.
Right.
On a case-by-case basis, generally.
Okay. So you said there's ways to make small adaptations.
Yes. Usually individual accommodations of one sort or another, extension on a homework due date, or an exam accommodation, whether it's officially through the testing center or not. Some students have unique circumstances that I try to accommodate within reason.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So from time to time, you monitor the progress, right? And see, you don't wait for students to reach out, but you can do the reverse, right?
Yes, yeah, even a large class, if I notice a student who stops attending or big drop in homework or exam scores, I'll sometimes reach out one-on-one and say, hey, what's going on?
Canvas usage. If you look at the time that they've been spent on Canvas, if you use a Canvas for your course, if by the 4th week the students spend hour 15 minutes total, that's a troubling sign. Then the instructor can reach out and say, well, what's up? What's going on? Internet problems, time, whatever. So, but yeah, there are mechanisms by which we can monitor and then investigate further.
Duncan, did you have something?
To hit on a couple of things, one thing you mentioned was kind of the gamification, which I think is a really important aspect. And I think that one of the things with a in-person format is it's more important to have, I think, more spread out due dates because people have more things going on in in-person classes. And so having more time to complete those, be the more free-spirited, I think is great. But when an online format, you have to, I think, be a little bit more rigid in how you structure the classes because otherwise students will get behind. They have to have some sort of motivation, the kind of levels that you mentioned again, that's more present online. And she mentioned a little bit of a couple of aspects of making the online classes be more engaging, and I think that's really important. I've had discussion posts where you have to have replies, so you actually get to know people's character a little bit. You can kind of bounce things off, and so having those can be really beneficial, as well as the GroupMes having opportunities to come together. Publishing the people on the canvas is really important, so that's something that's super small that I really appreciate. I've had a lot of people reach out to me, hey, I didn't understand this. Do you have notes for the class? Stuff like that. So there's a lot of online resources that can be adapted to the in-person classes, but in an online-only format, the main motivator for me is oftentimes the professor giving good feedback on assignments. It can just be something, I feel oftentimes when it's online, they just give you a grade and it's like, why? And so oftentimes if they give me some good feedback, whether it's, even if I got a good grade, it's like a good job on this assignment. It makes a really big difference because it might be the only positive thing I heard that day. And like, yes, I did a good job on this. And so it makes you significantly more motivated to continue to push through the class if it is difficult in an online format.
I agree, and I actually have one other thing to point out for in terms of keeping your students motivated, making sure that you take their feedback. Even if it's, like, I have one class where at the beginning of a class, let's say like 3 or 4 classes throughout the semester, we'll take the first 15 minutes and she'll say, here's kind of what faculty are discussing in terms of like what we think might be struggles for students. What do you guys think? Tell me what you think. What would you guys recommend to fix it? And we'll spend 15 minutes just discussing it. And then later on, she'll say, yeah, so I brought those to the faculty and here's kind of the general consensus on what we agreed on. And it makes us feel valued in that we're not just being told what to do, but we actually have input and value to that conversation. And also it keeps us engaged because it builds that rapport with the professor, especially in online formats. I think that's extremely important when it's online only because for my level of courses now, I know most of my classmates and I know my professors because I'm doing mostly higher level courses and we've all been in other classes together. But especially when I was in lower level courses or especially as a freshman, if I was in an online only course, I wouldn't know my professor. I wouldn't know any students in the class, and I was homeschooled as well, so I would not have been comfortable just going up and being like, hey, I've never met you before, but can I get your contact information to study for this class? Or I wouldn't have felt as comfortable going and talking to the professor. So I think having that discussion and just showing that you value their input can go a long ways towards making sure the students know they can come to you.
That's another thing with some of my classes this semester is I've had a midterm evaluation, which has been really beneficial because often one of the really cool things is an instructor gave a midterm evaluation of her and then she actually sent an email and said, hey, this is each one of the main issues, like 10 out of 15 of you said this, and then this is what I'm going to do to change that. And so I felt that you really felt actually valued as a student, and it gave time for, if the first half of the semester wasn't great, you still had enough time you can share anonymously, and she can make improvements for the last half. Because each semester has different dynamics, and so I really appreciated that. It made you feel heard. And another thing that we were talking about was the big classrooms and the difficulty of getting people connected within the large classes. Right. And I think just trying to make yourself available is one of the biggest things, because with the online format, it is easier for the quieter students to reach out, and the extroverted students can come to your office hours or whatever. So just trying to make yourself known as available can be really beneficial. And it also can help benefit, if you know that they're there, you can sometimes push through on your own, just because you know if you needed help, it was there, but you don't have to even always seek it out. So.
But that's not spontaneous from all students. I had a professor who enforced it. So it was the first homework actually. You had to send 5 messages to each student. You had a week to do so.
I love it.
Yeah, we chatted. Yeah, we did. We did chat. I think it was very important because otherwise nobody, it's a class, it's an undergrad class, and there are students from different departments. That on its own, so we're not connected at all. But he wanted us to work in a group, like to know each other and to do that, and it was very helpful. I texted a lot of people, and since then we're now chatting I don't like GroupMe. Because I was about to jump in when you mentioned that they asked a TA to be monitoring I don't like that. I was given a GroupMe team, but it was too much. I felt like they were sending messages all the time, like 24/7. So at times wanting you to reply. Then I was like, no, let's do email and Canvas. So and Dr. Irina mentioned the issue of independence. I liked being independent. So that's why I had a lot of challenges with the online classes. So when I did my master's at the University of Toledo, most grad school classes were in the afternoon, and I loved it. So I want to wake up in the morning and go do my research in my lab, and then go to attend the classes. Because in our mentality, I don't know if it's right or wrong, but it's right. My research comes first, then my classes. So if I have to rank them. So now when you give me a class at 8 a.m., then I feel like, why? And now when it's online, I have a tendency to, ignore it. So that's what I was doing. I'll go to my lab and the professor was like, you missed a quiz. I'm like, I missed a quiz. Why did you give a quiz then? Right? So I want, since the lectures are recorded, it makes some students lazy in the sense that I'm gonna, watch it later. So by so doing, you congest your schedule. So now you have many videos. I've heard some students saying, I have 6 lectures I need to watch, right? So probably they were watching, but they were not involved. They feel like, okay, I'm gonna watch it later. So, and that affects your time management.
Right.